What's the worst time you've cracked up laughing?
A distant relative's funeral. It was after the part of the service held outside at the graveyard, and people were standing in their own individual groups talking. The pastor came up to my dad and, since they hadn't met, asked what my dad's name was. My dad responded Heath, and the pastor very seriously replied Beef, without a hint of confusion as to why he would be called Beef. My dad corrected him, they chatted, and the pastor went away. Me and my dad sort of looked at each other to confirm we both heard Beef, and proceeded to laugh our asses off, very much within earshot of the deceased's family. My dad eventually got himself under control, but I couldn't. I had to go sit in the car. We must have gotten some dirty ass looks, but I couldn't see anything through the tears from how hard I was laughing. My grandfather's funeral. My grandpa had a full military funeral a few years back. My one cousin, who is still enlisted, was in full dress blues and was carrying out my grandfather's ashes in the box my aunts picked out. My cousin's son, who was 4 at the time, screamed "Dad! What's in the box?" at the top of his lungs when he saw his father walking out. I quickly put my hand over his mouth. I was watching his 2 sons since he and his wife had roles in the funeral, and even though I left my children at home thinking it was no place for small children, I was tasked with watching both of his that were both under 5. My cousin's wife got visibly upset that I stopped her son from screaming. Well, the whole situation and the fact that he had screamed the same line Brad Pitt did in Seven, was too much and I got hysterical. Apparently this is enough for my cousin's wife to still be bitter about 10 years later, but whatever. When I was in high school we had this event called Challenge Day that was meant to bring us all closer together and stop bullying. At one point they separated us in groups of about 5 to 7 people per group. We didn't have to speak, but we were encouraged to talk about things that bothered us. This girl in my group was a very heavy girl and she was talking about being bullied by her family, people at school, etc. Just as she started crying and talking about how she had contemplated suicide, I happened to look across the room to the group where my best friend was sitting. She must have been daydreaming or something because she had this weird, vacant look on her face that made me bust out laughing. I realized how bad it looked, so I was trying to explain why I was laughing while this poor girl was talking about being bullied, but there was really nothing I could say that made it okay. It's been 13 years and I still feel horrible. If you see this, Melissa, I'm so sorry I laughed during your story.
A funeral. The guy who died had fallen off a ledge and broke his neck on the way down. Someone was giving the eulogy and said something about how he died doing what he loved. My friend next to me leaned over and said, "He died doing what he loved, falling down and breaking his neck."
I fully admit this makes me a terrible person. I'm on the bus, and there's an old lady sitting on one of the fold-down seats behind the pushchair, wheelchair space, UK bus. Some arsehole cuts in front of the bus, causing the bus driver to slam the brakes on. This catapults the old lady out of the seat and she faceplants the wheelchair space. It's not funny, she could have been seriously hurt, she was fine, but I could not fully stifle a laugh. There's just something about watching human bodies get catapulted that makes me laugh.
I was prob 8 or 9 riding in the back seat with my little brother, and a kid I knew from school darted out into the road in front of my dad, and he locked up the brakes, but still clipped the kid and sent him sailing into the ditch. My brother and I looked at each other and just started cracking up. The kid ended up being fine, just crying and scared, but we didn't know it at that moment. Such a weird reaction, but we did not grow up to be psychopaths, at least.
First chiropractic treatment. The doc was a petite lady. I'm a bigger guy, and she had to basically climb on my upper body to administer the adjustment, and it all felt silly. When I actually heard my bones crunching around, I couldn't handle it anymore and burst out laughing. It was embarrassing.
I was taken along to a Mormon church by my ex-wife and her family. Was instructed to be on my best behavior. At one point, some little kids got up to sing a song. I mean, it was fine and everything. Very sweet. But not anything that mind-blowing, you know? Then a few other people, adults, got up to speak, and after a while the main guy, pastor? Reverend? Got back up to carry on with the service. But he got so inexplicably choked up by the children's song that he almost had a full-on breakdown. I was like, first of all, that happened about 20 minutes ago, why are you only just crying about it now? And second of all, it wasn't really that emotional. Pull yourself together, my man. But he just got more and more overcome with emotion to the point where his voice got squeakier and squeakier and just couldn't get words out. It was too ridiculous for me. My wife saw that my shoulders were shaking as I was trying to stifle laughter and, sensing the imminent danger, sent me outside. Outside, there was this teenage dude waiting on a bench. I asked him what he did to be kicked out and he said I farted. Probably my favorite trip to church ever.
We used to have a football coach that loved the drink. He would often show up before matches drunk, so his tactics and pre-match speeches were interesting to say the least. One Sunday he walked into our changing room flat out drunk. He slurred something I, and some other players, didn't hear and made this whole speech about doing it for his mother. We just burst out laughing because we figured it was one of his weird motivation speeches again. Turned out the part we hadn't understood was him saying his mother had died the night before. I heard a guy reading something aloud, badly. I thought I was hearing a wisecracking friend and I broke up laughing at him. Turned out it wasn't him, it was his dyslexic younger brother, who broke into tears and ran off.
So, I was at my grandpa's funeral, the service before everyone goes to the burial, and I'm standing next to my cousins, listening to the service. It was a sad day, and we were really just trying to support my grandma through it, so we're all standing there, and it's time for the live song that they do for the service, and all of a sudden the absolute worst song, most terrible voice I've ever heard, just comes over a blaring loudspeaker right above our heads, with this dude singing like, picture Gilbert Gottfried trying to sing like Mariah Carey. It was so unbelievably bad, and something about how we were all being super quiet and respectful. And it was such a serious time. Then all of a sudden we're just listening to this screaming dude sing this song, the last song to commemorate his entire life. It was so bad. Honestly though, I wish he could have heard it, because he probably would have been laughing too. So my cousins and I start looking at each other, just to see if we were all having the same reaction to this, and we all just start laughing uncontrollably. I was closing my eyes and taking deep breaths to try and suppress it, but it was just the silliest thing ever. And if you know that feeling, the harder you try to stop it, the harder it is to do. The second we got in the limo, everyone else in the family was like, was that not the most horrendous song you've ever heard in your life? So in retrospect it's pretty funny, but holy shit, was that uncomfortable when it was happening.
I went to my uncle's funeral a few years back in the church. We started singing hymns, and part of the lyrics for one song were "My God is a good God." My uncle's wife had taken his death pretty hard, and had a problem with alcohol for years. So she showed up to the funeral wasted, then sang at the top of her lungs while crying, "My dog is a good dog." The second time she sang it I completely lost it. Luckily, laughing at a funeral looks a lot like crying, so only the people around me knew. I was laughing for a week after that.
At my grandma's funeral, I managed to hold it in to the point where it looked like crying, but it was after the service and the family went over to the place she was to be interred. She wasn't cremated, but her husband had been. So they had his urn to place in her casket. They loaded her casket on the machine, got it up and into the wall, her spot is in the highest of 4 rows, and realized they forgot to put in Grandpa. Had to load her back on, bring her back down. And then on the way back up again, the lifting machine malfunctioned. It just started spazzing out, short little up down movements. I pretty much lost it, and it was even worse because everyone else was super upset and I was just there trying to not burst out laughing aloud.
During standardized tests, when everyone is supposed to be super quiet. I threw a granola bar crumb at my friend and it landed in his ear accidentally. We were both cracking up for like 10 minutes, when the rest of the room was dead silent.
When my mum was in labor. She had a home birth in our basement, we both suffer from nervous laughter. She was in incredible pain, and I was just sat there laughing because she sounded like a Darth Vader moose sucking on the gas and air. She found the funny side of it, afterwards.
One time in college, a little person on a wheelchair/electric scooter zoomed out of the college library. He immediately lost control and flung himself off the wheelchair. Paper, books, pens scattered everywhere. I was with my cohort at the time and everyone was shocked and worried. I was just about the only one who laughed and couldn't stop laughing. Needless to say, I was branded an asshole for some time afterwards.
Excellent question in class. I pointed to my friend Harry, don't forget to add the definite article and number 3. To which my Spanish teacher reprimanded me. Don't help him cheat, especially not in front of me. Then Seth, from across the room, asks who cheated? To which I responded as quickly and violently as possible, your mother cheated. Turns out, his parents were divorced, and he thought it was hilarious. So, while he and I were laughing, we were watching my teacher send an email to my parents. We still laugh as hard about this every day, after 2 years.
My cousin and I were visiting a monastery and we sat in on Vespers, where the monks chant for about half an hour. It's really quite beautiful, and we loved it and went back a second time, but the first time we got the giggles, because we were supposed to be quiet. It was horrifying. We looked at each other with such fright, because we could not stop laughing. We were so scared the monks would kick us out. Fortunately, we got ourselves under control and sat without twitching for the rest of it.
Me and my mom both have a thing where we laugh when we're nervous or uncomfortable. My dad dislocated his hip and was sitting in the ER waiting for the doctor, and he was getting impatient. We couldn't stop laughing at him, which only made him madder and us laugh more. We had to leave the room.
It was 25 years ago, and I was a freshman in high school, and I watched a kid in my algebra class start to fall asleep with a pencil in his fist with his arms crossed, and he fell asleep and deep-throated the damn thing. I was the only one to see it, and felt super bad for laughing at him. He gagged so loud.
My grandmother's funeral. My aunt showed up wearing the same dress my grandmother was going to be buried in. I was okay, until my cousin walked up and asked me which one I thought was going to go home and change. Our middle school teachers took us skiing as a school trip. Well, a classmate didn't sit properly on the chairlift and started frantically asking for my help. I still remember him waving his arms like a turtle that fell on its back while the chair kept taking us higher and higher from the ground. I really wanted to help but genuinely couldn't stop laughing. Being 13 is weird.
My friend's sister was spoon-feeding her baby daughter, and was waving her arm around doing the whole "here comes the aeroplane." And the food fell off the spoon onto her face and she started crying. I felt so bad for laughing, but the way it happened was just so ridiculous, I couldn't help myself.
In a school-wide assembly about depression and suicide, shortly after someone hung themselves off a bathroom stall door, my friend ripped a loud-ass fart. A moment of silence please, thunderous sound as cheeks get clapped, and gas is expelled.
My 6th grade English teacher was born with some kind of condition where she can't really control her farts. Anyway, it would happen on occasion, so that was something that we always had to stifle our laughs over. However, one day my friend Tony just couldn't keep his laugh at bay. He laughed so hard and that just got everyone laughing. He got a detention and then the teacher gave this big lecture about not making fun of people who can't control certain things. It never felt so bad to laugh so hard.
Went and saw Titanic in the theater when it first came out. When the boat is sinking, and people started falling, super sad moment to others, the one guy bounces off the smokestack with a nice bong sound and my sister starts laughing her ass off, which made me laugh. We were the only two people in the whole place cracking up, and the boat of course. I laugh when I'm nervous, and I had to witness in court. I laughed at the end of each sentence so much, that I was accused of making everything up, and I had to explain that I was nervous.
Oh my gosh, my grandmother was in the hospital for a staph infection that was really bad and painful, so the nurses gave her morphine to ease the pain. The morphine made her feel like she was speaking normally, but instead she was saying gibberish that the nurses called word salad, and me being the douche that I am, couldn't help but laugh. I tried to laugh discreetly, but that didn't work out either. It was rough.
Well friends, that's all for now. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we would love to hear your stories in the comments below.